Say hi to your dead daddy, you worthless cripple." With that venomous taunt, Grant kicked Avery, Oak Creek High's disabled black girl, off the edge of a rocky cliff, his eyes alight with a cruelty no teenager should possess. For months, the bullies mocked her, isolated her, and called her trash. But no one could imagine their hate would go as far as attempted murder. Just as her wheelchair plunged toward the jagged rocks, two Hell's Angels roared from the shadows, igniting a frantic rescue and unraveling the buried secrets of a poisoned town. What kind of darkness drives teenagers to silence their classmate with such violence? And how did the fragile girl survive? If you want to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our community. You won't want to miss what happens next. At Oak Creek High, Mercy was for sale, and Avery Johnson could never afford it. Her wheelchair glided down the polished halls, the rubber wheels whispering secrets only the unwanted could hear. Oak Creek was a mining town where money stank of limestone dust, and the poor could choke on it. The school itself felt like a fortress. Banners from football championships dangled above cracked lockers. But not even the trophies could distract from the invisible borders that divided rich from poor, black from white, strength from vulnerability. Avery, 16, black, paralyzed from the waist down, was the town's easiest target. Her eyes were sharp, always searching for exits and shadows. She wore hope the way others wore coats in winter, thin, battered, clinging to her by a single button. She made it to her locker that morning before the ambush. Grant Sterling, the blond son of the quarry owner, swaggered down the corridor with Harlan Brooks, a boy with the smirk of someone who never paid for his mistakes. The noise of their laughter split the morning open. "Hey, speed bump!" Grant barked, stepping right in front of Avery's chair. Harlan, chewing on the corner of a hall pass, circled behind. They were both wearing varsity jackets, badges of immunity in a place where privilege was the only currency that mattered. Avery glanced up, defiant. "Move." Grant grinned, wide and cold. "You know the rules. The lanes are for real students. Garbage belongs by the dumpsters." He turned to Harlan, who already held a cafeteria tray brimming with yesterday's lunch slop. Milk, gravy, something gray and unidentifiable. Before Avery could brace herself, Harlan dumped the entire mess onto her lap. The liquid splattered across her jeans, soaked into her backpack, dripped between the spokes of her wheelchair. A hush fell over the hallway. Dozens of eyes flicked her way, then away again. The only person who paused was Miss Tilden, a history teacher nearing retirement. She watched, heart pounding, and then, with a subtle shake of her head, turned into her classroom, shutting the door behind her. Power here meant silence. "Guess that's what happens to defective merchandise," Grant sneered, stepping closer. He leaned in so only she could hear, voice ice cold. "My father says charity cases like you drag the whole town down. Don't make trouble, Avery. Or next time it's the stairs." Someone giggled, a sharp, ugly sound. A girl in cheer gear covered her mouth, eyes shining. Avery met her gaze until the girl looked away, suddenly fascinated by her nails. One by one, the crowd dispersed, abandoning her in a puddle of filth and humiliation. Avery's fingers trembled as she picked soggy notebooks from her lap. Her mind screamed to fight back, but she knew better. At Oak Creek, one word out of place could cost her more than her dignity. She rolled herself toward the bathroom, her wheels leaving a sticky trail. Inside the cramped stall, Avery scrubbed her hands with freezing water, watching old stains swirl down the drain. Her reflection in the chipped mirror looked back, lips pressed tight, cheeks streaked with grime. She blinked hard, refusing to cry where someone might hear. Not here. Lunchtime came, and she ate alone at a table nearest the exit. Her phone vibrated, her mother checking in from the hospital. "Love you, Av. Don't forget your meds. I'll be late again tonight." Avery typed back, "I'm fine." A lie. She finished her meal in silence, aware of the empty seats around her. Nobody sat with the girl in the chair. Not anymore. The day dragged on, each class a parade of cold stares, whispered insults, and deliberate bumps in the hallway. Grant and Harlan always close enough to remind her. There was no safe corner here. Even teachers, sensing which way the wind blew, marked her absences but never her bruises. When the final bell rang, Avery waited for the halls to empty before moving. She wheeled herself outside, the air sharp with the scent of truck exhaust and cut grass. The yellow buses roared away, their laughter floating out of open windows. Avery watched, invisible to the world. She made her way home, her arms aching. The Johnsons' house was small, peeling paint, uneven porch, front yard scattered with forgotten toys from a better time. Inside, the hush felt absolute. The only sound, the ticking clock and the clatter of her wheels on the old wood floor. Avery's mother, Vivian, worked nights as a nurse at the county hospital. Most evenings, she left before sunset and came back at dawn, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but always gentle with Avery. Tonight, Vivian had already left a plate of food in the fridge and a note by the door. "Stay strong, baby. I love you." Avery rolled into the living room, her gaze falling on the mantel. The photograph stared back, a family frozen in happier days. Her father, smiling, arms wrapped around a younger, standing Avery. She reached up and touched the frame, letting her fingers trace the outline of her father's face. He'd died 2 years ago. An accident, people whispered. Drunk at the quarry. Oak Creek didn't care to ask more. For Avery, there were only memories, and an empty place at the dinner table. She sat in silence, the weight of grief and isolation pressing down until she couldn't hold it in. Sobs ripped from her chest, quiet at first, then fierce, shaking her shoulders. She remembered laughter, backyard barbecues, the warm grip of her father's hand as he spun her in the grass. Later, in the bathroom, Avery scrubbed the day's filth from her skin. She stared into the mirror, jaw clenched, cheeks still stained. With a shaky hand, she wiped the last smear of dried gravy from her chin and whispered, "Dad, I wish you were here to protect me." But Avery had no idea. A secret about her father's death was waiting in the shadows, ready to shatter everything she thought she knew. The punishment for being a problem at Oak Creek High was always extra work. Avery wheeled herself through the back corridors with a plastic bucket balanced on her knees and a mop handle wedged against her shoulder. This wasn't detention. This was exile, delivered under the gentle smile of Vice Principal Harris, who'd quietly insisted that contributing to the school community was an honor, even for students in special circumstances. Avery understood. It was just another way to keep her invisible, away from the crowds, out of mind. The air in the back hallway was thick with the sour tang of sweat and mildew. It led past the boys' locker room, a place she usually avoided, but today she was late finishing her rounds. She hesitated, then pushed on, eager to finish before the after-school chaos began. The hallway was empty, or so she thought. A burst of laughter, coarse, sharp, echoed from behind the half-closed locker room door. Avery paused. She heard voices, familiar, cruel. Harlan's nasal whine drifted out. "Did you see her face today? I swear, I almost felt bad. Almost." Grant's answer cut through the air, soaked in arrogance. "She's like a roach, just keeps crawling back, no matter how hard you stomp. Tomorrow, I say, we rig the fire alarm and lock her in the janitor's closet. Let's see how long she lasts, without help." Harlan snickered. "You really think she'll break?" "She's already broken, Harlan. That's the point. We're just making it official." Avery gripped her mop so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to wheel away, block out the words, but something rooted her to the spot. She listened, breath shallow. There was a sudden, clattering sound inside. The voices dipped, then rose again, this time quieter, conspiratorial. Grant's voice dropped low. "Forget the cripple. I've got something better." A thud, the creak of a locker, and then Grant's triumphant whisper. "Check this out!" Harlan sounded confused. "What's that? Some old notebook?" Grant's tone oozed with contempt. "Not just any notebook, genius. This is the logbook that old man Johnson was always carrying around the quarry. The one my dad said could ruin everything if it got out." Avery's heart hammered in her chest. She strained to hear every word. Grant flipped through the pages, paper rustling. He thought he could expose Dad. All those times he threatened to send this to the county. Too bad he didn't get the chance. Harlan whistled, half impressed, half scared. You mean? Grant laughed. A chilling sound, devoid of any remorse. Let's just say my dad made sure Johnson took his secrets to the grave. No logbook, no story, no problem. Avery's head spun. It was as if the ground had dropped out beneath her. Her father, murdered, not just lost to a senseless accident. And these boys, they treated it like a game. She felt a tremor start in her hands. The mop handle slipped, clattering loudly to the floor. In that instant, the laughter in the locker room died. "Did you hear that?" Harlan hissed. "Shut up!" Grant growled. The heavy thud of footsteps approached. Avery's mind screamed, "Move!" She spun her chair, heart pounding. The wheels jammed for a split second on the cracked linoleum, just enough to waste precious seconds. Her hands fumbled with panic. "Don't look back! Don't let them see you're scared!" Avery propelled herself down the shadowy hallway, breath ragged, her heart slamming against her ribs. Behind her, the locker room door banged open, and footsteps pounded into the corridor. Panic blazed. She nearly clipped a trash can, jostled her bucket, and rounded the corner in a desperate, clattering escape. For one terrifying moment, she thought she'd be caught. But as she hurtled past a bank of old trophy cases, she caught a glimpse. Her own terrified reflection, ghostly and alone. From the far end of the corridor, Grant stepped into the light, eyes scanning, jaw set. For a split second, the edge of Avery's wheelchair flashed around the corner before vanishing. Grant's eyes narrowed, a slow, venomous smile spreading across his face. "I can smell a rat," he murmured, his tone both amused and menacing. Or maybe just a mouse who's gotten too curious. Harlan started forward, anxious, voice low and urgent. Should we go after her? What if she heard? What if she tells? Grant caught him by the shoulder, holding him back with chilling confidence. "Let her run. She can't do a thing to us. I've got a plan." His smirk deepened, cold as a winter stone. "Trust me, Harlan. She'll be sorry." They melted back into the locker room, the secret notebook hidden once more, leaving the hall empty but for the faint, frantic echo of Avery's flight. Avery, meanwhile, careened around corners until she reached a safe, empty stairwell. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to quiet her trembling hands, mind spinning with the terrible truth she'd uncovered. She had escaped, for now, but even as relief washed over her, she knew. She was trapped in a much bigger, darker game. The hunt had begun, and Avery Johnson was holding a secret that could get her killed. The Johnsons' kitchen, usually so small it could barely fit 2 chairs and a battered table, felt suddenly enormous that evening. Avery sat alone at the table, tracing the rim of her plate with a fork, trying to assemble the words to tell her mother everything. She could still hear Grant's voice in her head, replaying those deadly secrets over and over, each word heavier than the last. The need to tell Vivian was like a fire in her chest, urgent, painful, impossible to ignore. Keys rattled at the door. Vivian swept in, the autumn wind following behind her. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her hair flattened under a faded blue cap, but there was something unmistakable in her eyes, something bright, almost giddy. For the first time in months, she hummed as she unpacked takeout from a brown bag. "Good news, baby. I got your favorite, spicy chicken. Extra sauce," Vivian called out, voice warm. Avery barely looked up. She had rehearsed this all day, the speech about Dad, the logbook, the truth. But Vivian's mood swept through the room, disarming her, twisting her resolve. Vivian leaned against the counter, still smiling. "I have some news, too. Something good. Something for me." She hesitated, and her face softened with a rare, almost bashful hope. I met someone, Av. Someone I care about. Someone who cares about me." Avery's fork clattered onto the table. For a moment, She couldn't breathe. You what? Vivian tried to smile, but her lips trembled. He's kind, Avery. He listens. She trailed off, searching for the right words. He's someone I met at the hospital. I didn't mean for it to happen, it just did. Avery stared, the shock giving way to something sharp, something ugly. Is that why you've been coming home late? Laughing at your phone when you think I'm not looking? Vivian's hands tightened on the counter. Avery, you know my hours are crazy. You know I... Stop it. Avery's voice cracked. Too loud in the cramped kitchen. Stop acting like it's normal, like we're some happy family. Dad's only been gone 2 years and you're already moving on? Vivian closed her eyes, swallowing hard. It's not about forgetting your father. Nothing will ever erase him from my heart, baby. But I have to keep living. I have to find a way to be whole again. Avery's anger flared. Whole? Is that what you call it? You just find someone new? Like Dad never mattered? Like none of this? She gestured to the empty seat at the table, the faded family photos lining the wall. Ever mattered? Vivian's eyes filled with tears, but she stood her ground. You don't understand what it's like to be this lonely, Avery. To come home and hear nothing but the clock ticking. To work all night and pretend it doesn't hurt. I deserve to feel alive again. I deserve to be loved. Avery's jaw trembled. The pain and betrayal poured out before she could stop it. You're so selfish. Dad was everything. He protected us, and now you're just... replacing him? You don't deserve him. You never did. Vivian recoiled as if slapped. For a heartbeat, the room was silent but for Avery's ragged breathing. I'm sorry you feel that way, Vivian whispered. I only wanted to share my happiness with you. I thought you'd want that for me. Avery turned away, tears burning her eyes. I don't want anything from you. Not anymore. She wheeled herself down the hall and slammed the door behind her. The impact shook the frame. The sound echoed like a final judgment. She locked the door, her hands shaking, and let the tears come. Hot, uncontrollable, full of every ache and betrayal she'd tried to swallow since the accident. Outside her room, Vivian sank to the floor, pressing her back against the door. She wept silently, too afraid to admit the truth, too afraid to tell Avery who this new man truly was, and what he might mean for both their lives. In her bedroom, Avery rocked back and forth, clutching her pillow to her chest. The darkness felt absolute. She thought of her father, the sound of his laughter, the weight of his arm around her shoulders. He would have known what to do. He would have made the world make sense again. Her phone buzzed. She wiped her eyes and reached for it, expecting another useless notification. Instead, a message glared at her from an unknown number. I know what you heard. Tomorrow you pay. Her hands went cold. The words pulsed on the screen like a warning bell, each letter a threat she couldn't ignore. She stared at the ceiling, heart hammering, mind racing. Somewhere someone was watching, waiting. Tomorrow, the world would change. And outside, Vivian stayed on the floor, praying for the strength to fix what felt irreparably broken. The class field trip was already set in stone, written on every calendar and whispered by every anxious parent. For Avery, it would be a journey into the unknown, a journey from which she might never return. The field trip to Eagle Ridge had been circled in red on every classroom calendar for months, a mandatory community bonding experience, according to the administration, and an annual ordeal for students like Avery. As the yellow buses wound their way out of town, the countryside grew wild and rugged, shadows from the morning clouds crawling across abandoned barns and the edges of the quarry. Eagle Ridge itself loomed in the distance, all dense forest and sheer cliffs, a place where legends were born, and sometimes people simply disappeared. Avery sat at the back of the bus, her wheelchair wedged beside a pile of forgotten backpacks, invisible as ever. She watched the passing trees and tried to quiet the storm inside her chest. Her phone was already set to record, zipped inside her backpack, a small act of defiance, or maybe desperation. She needed proof, something she could hold up to her mother, to the world, to anyone who might finally listen. The bus screeched to a stop at the trailhead. Students poured out, voices rising in excitement, teachers barking out roll calls and reminders. Grant and Harlan lingered by the door, tossing glances back at Avery, their expressions unreadable. Mr. Loomis, the chaperone, gave the usual speech. "Stay on the trails. Don't wander off, buddy system. Be respectful." Avery rolled forward, but before she could join the main group, Grant blocked her path with a lazy smile. "Hey, you don't want to slow everyone down, do you?" he said, voice dripping with false concern. "Why don't you let us help you take the scenic route?" Harlan snickered, nudging a few classmates. There was an exchange of quick, guilty looks. Money passed from Grant's palm into open hands. Silent deals struck in the shadows. The other students moved ahead, eyes averted. No one protested. No one wanted trouble. Avery felt a surge of panic. "Mr. Loomis!" she called, but her voice was swallowed by the noise, by the wind rustling through the pines. Mr. Loomis glanced back just long enough to see Avery surrounded, then turned away, busy pretending to supervise the rest of the class. "Let's move, everyone! Stay together!" he shouted, his voice brittle with indifference. Grant and Harlan steered Avery's wheelchair off the main path, deeper into the forest. Rocks jarred her wheels. Roots caught under her footplates. The sunlight faded, replaced by the hush of trees and the distant cry of a hawk. Avery's fear grew with every yard. "Let me go," she said, trying to dig her palms into the wheels to resist. Grant leaned in, his breath hot on her cheek. "You talk too much, Johnson. Let's see how brave you are out here." Harlan rifled through Avery's backpack, yanking out her phone. He flicked it on, saw the blinking red light of the recording app. "Look what we've got," he sneered, tossing it to Grant. Grant smashed the phone against a stone. The screen splintered, sparks dancing in the moss. He slapped Avery so hard her head snapped back, her ears ringing. "You think you can outsmart us?" He spat. "You're nothing. You're just a cripple with a martyr complex." Avery gasped, pain flaring in her cheek. She tried to shove Grant away, but her arms were weak, unsteady. Tears blurred her vision. "Please," she whispered, "just let me go. I won't say anything." But they were past listening. Harlan tipped her wheelchair until she clung to the armrests, the world spinning. Grant dug through her backpack, tossing books and medication bottles into the undergrowth. He found her lunch, dumped it onto the trail, then upended her water bottle over her head. Avery's voice cracked with desperation. "Stop! Please! Someone will see!" Grant grabbed her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. "No one's coming, Avery. Out here, it's just us. And we can do whatever we want." Harlan laughed, nervous, glancing over his shoulder. "Maybe we should hurry. Someone might double back." But Grant was high on the thrill, his cruelty sharpened by the absence of witnesses. "No one cares about her, Harlan. Not at school, not out here. She's alone. Always will be." They shoved her forward, deeper along a twisting side trail, where the ground grew rocky and the trees thinned. The forest opened onto the edge of Eagle Ridge, a dizzying drop, the wind howling up from the canyon far below. Avery clawed at the armrests, her knuckles white. "Please, Grant, don't—" Grant circled behind her, gripping the handles of the chair. Harlan stood nearby, chewing his thumbnail, sweat beading on his forehead. A distant sound rumbled through the trees, a low mechanical growl. Grant didn't hear it, too focused on Avery, too caught up in his own vicious momentum. He leaned close, voice a razor's edge. "Let's see if that fancy chair can fly." He pushed Avery's wheelchair to the very edge of the cliff, the world tilting beneath her, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out every other sound. Wind screamed over Eagle Ridge, howling up from the black gorge below. Avery's wheelchair balanced inches from the void, the wheels trembling on loose stone. The world shrank to this narrow strip of earth, the cliff's edge yawning hungrily beneath her, Grant's shadow looming above. Avery's pulse hammered in her throat. Her hands, numb with terror, slipped over the armrests, searching for any grip. Grant's fingers dug into the handles behind her, tightening with every cruel word. Harlan hovered just out of reach, wringing his hands, sweat glinting on his forehead, eyes wild. Last chance to beg? Grant sneered, voice guttural with rage. Go on. Say you're sorry for all your lies. Say you're nothing. Avery shook her head, defiance flickering through the terror in her eyes. You'll pay for this. Someone will find out. Grant snorted. Nobody's coming for you. Not out here. He leaned in, his breath hot and sour. You think you matter? You're a mistake, same as your old man. Harlan swallowed hard, shifting from foot to foot. Maybe we should stop, man. She's had enough. Shut up, Grant snarled, turning on Harlan, eyes flashing with a violence that made even his friend shrink away. You want to join her? Avery's heart thundered. Panic threatened to swallow her whole, but then instinct took over. She slid her hand beneath her jacket, closing it around the cold metal cylinder she'd hidden there that morning. The pepper spray. One last weapon. A secret she'd clung to out of pure desperation. Harlan stepped closer, hands out, trying to calm Grant. Let's just get out of here before someone sees. Avery struck. She yanked the canister free and jammed the trigger. A burning red mist sprayed straight into Harlan's eyes. He screamed, stumbling back, clawing at his face. My eyes! Oh, God! The moment's chaos shattered the air. Avery tried to pivot, to push herself away from the edge, but Grant roared, fury overwhelming reason. You stupid bitch! He lunged forward, shoving Harlan aside. His face twisted into something monstrous, all the smug confidence gone, replaced by raw, animal rage. You think you can get away with this? He spat, grabbing Avery's chair, shaking it so violently her teeth rattled. No more games. She tried to shout for help, but the scream caught in her throat. The sound was lost to the wind, swallowed by the abyss. Grant drew back his leg and, with a guttural scream, kicked the wheelchair's frame. Say hi to your daddy for me! Avery's world exploded. She felt the ground disappear beneath her, gravity seizing her, pulling her into the open air. Her scream split the sky, echoing off the ancient stone. The wheelchair spun, twisting away from Grant's grasp, arms flailing, the world spinning into blue and black and endless nothing. In that frozen instant, Avery saw Grant's face, illuminated by the sick thrill of power, a look of savage, unrepentant satisfaction. His eyes shone with a darkness that could never be washed away. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to halt. Her fingers outstretched, the wind tearing at her hair, the last glimmer of sunlight on Grant's smile. Harlan, still blinded, staggered back, horror dawning as he realized what they had done. Grant watched, chest heaving, a predator at the peak of his triumph. But just as the world dissolved into air and terror, two thunderous shapes tore out of the forest behind Grant and Harlan. Leather vests flashed in the dappled light, patches stitched with the skull wing emblem that struck fear through half the county. The ground seemed to quake as Frank the gunner exploded from the brush, boots pounding, muscles coiled for war. His eyes locked on the cliff. He lunged, grasping wildly for Avery, fingertips brushing cold metal. Almost. The wheelchair wrenched out of reach, spinning into the abyss. For a single, shattering second, Frank clung to the armrest, biceps flexing, veins straining. But it slipped from his grip, and the chair tumbled, spinning and crashing, vanishing into nothing. Avery plummeted, wind shredding the breath from her lungs. Rocks blurred past, the roar in her ears louder than any scream. This is how it ends, she thought. Like my father, like every nameless soul lost to the dust. Then, out of the chaos, a gnarled root burst from the cliffside, a survivor's miracle. Avery's hand snapped out, catching it with fingers numb and slick with terror. The world jerked to a halt. Her shoulders screamed in protest, but she clung, dangling 3 meters below the rim, legs swinging over empty air. Above, Grant staggered back, pulse jackhammering. She's gone!" he gasped, voice high, broken. Harlan stared at his own trembling hands, realization finally cutting through the haze of adrenaline and cruelty. We killed her," he whispered. But before panic could root, another giant form emerged. A wall of muscle and tattoos blocking the only path back into the woods. Big Mike. His face was carved from stone, arms crossed, eyes unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. His very presence radiated a warning. No one leaves. Frank's rage boiled over. He spun on Grant, murder in his stare. "You little piece of garbage!" he snarled. "You don't even know what you just did!" Grant tried to run, but Frank's hand snapped out, catching him by the wrist. The biker's grip was iron. No more pointing at girls in wheelchairs. Tough guy! With a brutal twist, he bent Grant's arm behind his back and, with a sickening pop, broke the finger Grant had wagged in Avery's face. Grant howled, dropping to his knees. Harlan froze, the urge to flee warring with the terror of what would happen if he moved. Big Mike merely shifted his weight, blocking any escape. Frank leaned over the edge, heart hammering, searching desperately. "Avery! Avery, grab my hand!" His voice thundered across the gorge, desperate and commanding. Avery's grip slipped on the root, her vision flickering. She looked up, sunlight burning her eyes. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, gentle but unyielding. "Don't let go. Not now. Not ever." She squeezed the root tighter, fighting the urge to surrender. For a brief, dizzy moment, despair almost won. Was it worth it? Had anything ever changed in this place except the names of the graves? But then the noise above, a brawl breaking out, the slap of flesh and bone, Grant's cry of agony, snapped her back. This was not the end. Not if she still had breath. Frank glanced back at the two boys. His rage had not abated, but something colder took hold, a purpose that brooked no argument. He yanked out his phone, hands shaking with fury and fear. "Vivian!" he barked the moment the call connected. "Get to Eagle Ridge. Now! They tried to kill your daughter. Our daughter. Hurry!" Above, Grant cradled his broken finger, tears streaming down his face. "Who are you?" he whimpered, the false bravado gone, voice stripped to raw terror. Frank's face twisted into a snarl that could haunt nightmares. "Me?" His eyes blazed, and for the first time, Grant saw what real danger looked like. "I'm your daddy's worst nightmare. I'm the last mistake you'll ever make." Big Mike closed in, cracking his knuckles. Harlan pressed himself against a tree, whimpering, trapped between monsters and guilt. Meanwhile, Frank dropped to his knees, arm reaching over the edge, voice breaking. "Avery, I see you. Hold on, girl, hold on." But the root creaked. The bark tore at Avery's fingers, and sweat stung her eyes. Her strength was fading. "I'm here," she croaked, barely more than a whisper. Above the chaos, the first distant wail of sirens drifted through the trees. Help was coming, but the balance hung by a thread. Her life measured in inches of battered wood and the resolve to outlast one more minute. For Avery, suspended between earth and oblivion, time stretched and split. She tasted fear, betrayal, and the barest thread of hope. Her muscles screamed. Her vision swam. But something in her refused to let go. The forest trembled. The bikers closed in. Grant sobbed in pain and terror. Harlan frozen. Big Mike, standing sentry. Frank, wild-eyed, clung to the ledge, refusing to give up. And in that terrible pause before the world spun forward again, Avery knew. Fate had not finished with her yet. Avery clung to the gnarled root jutting from the cliff face, her arms trembling, knuckles scraped raw. Each second stretched into eternity, muscles burning, mind drifting to the edge of surrender. Then a voice thundered from above, ragged but defiant. "Hold on, Avery! Don't you dare let go!" It was Frank. She glimpsed his silhouette as he hurled himself flat at the edge, rope already knotted around his waist, muscles bunched with effort. Behind him, the woods filled with movement. Dozens of bikers, their engines silenced, forming a loose chain across the base of the ridge. Some fanned out below, waving their arms, calling up instructions. Others readied a net cobbled together from jackets, tarps, whatever they had. Frank lowered himself, scraping against the granite. "Avery, reach for me!" His tattooed arms stretched down, voice trembling between command and prayer. Sweat rolled down his brow. His own pain was nothing compared to the terror that this girl, Vivian's daughter, his own second chance, might slip away. But Avery recoiled, shaking her head, chest heaving with panic. "No, get away!" she sobbed. "You're with them, just let me go, please!" Frank cursed under his breath, digging his boots into the dirt. "I'm not with those bastards. Listen to me, Avery. Your mother, she saved my life. Christmas Eve, 5 years ago. Bullet in my gut, bleeding out in the snow. No hospital would touch me, but she did. I owe her everything, and I won't let you die here. Not now, not ever." Avery's resolve cracked. In the blur of tears and pain, a memory flickered. Her mother coming home late, hands shaking, a streak of someone else's blood on her sleeve. Stories she'd never told Avery, debts she'd never named. "I'm slipping," Avery whispered, voice barely audible. Frank gritted his teeth, stretching farther, voice breaking. "Don't quit on me, girl. Not after you made it this far." A gust of wind ripped at her jacket. The root groaned, bark peeling under her grip. She closed her eyes, and through the haze of agony and fear, let go, trusting this stranger, this giant with battered hands and eyes wild with fear for her. In one motion, Frank caught her wrist, locking it in an iron grip. He pulled, biceps bulging, his boots nearly losing purchase on the gravelly edge. For a heartbeat, they teetered, both suspended between earth and oblivion. Then Frank, growling with effort, hauled her upward, inch by agonizing inch, until finally both tumbled onto the brittle grass at the top of the ridge. The world spun. Avery lay panting, sobs racking her chest. She tasted blood in her mouth, salt on her lips. Hands, strangers' hands, reached out, steadying her, wrapping her in a blanket pulled from a biker's pack. Frank knelt beside her, breathing hard. "You did good, kid. Real good." From the chaos below, the roar of engines rose. Bikers repositioning, someone shouting directions, a net being folded away. Above, the clearing filled with people, rough men and women in battered leathers, faces marked by years and scars, but eyes shining with relief and pride. Through the noise, another voice rose, high, desperate, familiar. Avery. Vivian. She crashed through the brush, face streaked with sweat and tears, her nurse's scrubs torn and muddy. She dropped to her knees, pulling Avery into her arms, rocking her like a child, whispering her name over and over. Avery clung to her, shaking, unable to speak, unable to let go. Frank stood back, letting the moment unfold. For the first time in years, his hands trembled, not from violence, but from gratitude. He met Vivian's eyes across the tangle of limbs and emotion, and she nodded, silent thanks passing between them, ancient wounds stitched closed in an instant. Avery finally found her voice, broken and raw. "Mom?" "He saved me." Vivian stroked her hair, kissing her forehead. "You're safe now, baby. I promise." Avery looked up at Frank. The tattoos, the wild beard, the battered jacket. He smiled, softening for just a moment. She understood then. Sometimes angels didn't have wings. Sometimes they wore leather and carried scars. Before she could speak again, the shriek of sirens pierced the clearing. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees, the law descending in a fury. Frank tensed, exchanging glances with the other bikers. The world, just for a moment, held its breath. The clearing at the edge of Eagle Ridge. Moments ago, the stage for a rescue, now thrummed with a new, darker energy. Engines idled, leather jackets caught the sun, and the ragged breathing of Avery and her mother filled the air. But it was the sudden wail of sirens and crunch of tires that snapped everyone's attention to the dirt road. 3 black and white cruisers screeched to a halt, red and blue lights slicing through the trees. Deputy Chief Reynolds, Harlan's uncle and a man notorious for his iron jaw and colder heart, stepped out first. He was the law in Oak Creek, or at least the part of it owned by the Sterlings. His badge glinted in the late afternoon sun, and his hand never strayed far from his holster as he scanned the scene. Battered bikers, blood on Grant's nose, Avery's tear-streaked face, Vivian still holding her daughter tight. "Back away from the girl!" Reynolds barked, pistol already drawn and leveled at Frank. Two officers fanned out, one moving toward the circle of bikers, the other going straight for the cluster where Grant nursed his broken finger and Harlan cowered, ashen. Frank raised his hands, a slow, practiced move. "No one here is a threat to her. You're late, Chief." Reynolds ignored him. His gaze flicked to Grant. "Is this the man who hurt you boys?" Grant, voice trembling, seized the chance. "They attacked us, Uncle Rick. We tried to help Avery, and they went crazy. Liar!" Big Mike snarled. But Reynolds already had his story. "All of you, on your knees. Hands behind your heads. Weapons on the ground. Now!" His finger hovered on the trigger, sweat trickling behind his ear. The tension was electric. Any wrong move, and the clearing would become a war zone. Bikers exchanged glances. Some obeyed, slow and resentful, but others stood their ground. Phones raised, cameras pointed. The live stream was already rolling. 50 Hells Angels from 3 counties, broadcasting every word, every threat, to the world. Reynolds didn't care. He turned to the nearest biker with a GoPro. "Shut that off and hand over the footage." "No," the biker replied, voice flat. "You're not the only one who knows how to use a gun, officer." Reynolds's jaw twitched. He stepped toward Avery and Vivian, crowding them with his presence, trying to force them away from Frank and the other bikers. "You two, come with me. We'll get you checked by medics. These men," he glared at Frank, "will answer for what they've done." Vivian tried to shield Avery, but Reynolds pressed closer, voice low and dangerous. "Don't make this harder, Vivian. You know how things work around here." Avery's legs shook as she stood, bracing herself on her mother's arm. Pain shot through her body, but she refused to let Reynolds see it. "You want to hear the truth," she said, voice barely above a whisper, but slicing through the chaos like a blade. Reynolds didn't even look at her. "The truth is, you're coming with me, and you," he nodded at Frank, "are going to spend the night in a cell." Frank tensed, but Avery stepped forward. Her face was pale, her hair matted with sweat, but her eyes burned with a stubborn fire. "You're not taking anyone anywhere, Deputy. Not until you hear this." Reynolds sneered. "What's a crippled little girl got that could possibly—" Avery cut him off, pulling something from her sock, a tiny micro SD card glinting in the sun. She held it up, hand trembling but unyielding. "You're looking for a phone, but the evidence was never in the phone. I took this out before Grant smashed it. Every word, every threat, every confession about my dad, it's all on here. And guess what? The files are already backed up to Frank's cloud, to 5 more people who know exactly what's at stake." The crowd fell silent. The bikers straightened, cameras zoomed in. Even Grant forgot to clutch his hand for a second. Reynolds went pale, his mask of control slipping. "Give that to me," he ordered, voice strained. Avery shook her head, steely. "No. Everyone here knows. Everyone watching knows. You're not the law. You're the cover-up." Murmurs rose from the line of bikers. On every phone, the number of live viewers ticked higher. Someone whispered, "It's all here, folks. Dirty as they come." Reynolds scanned the scene, realization dawning. He was surrounded. 50 bikers, a girl who wouldn't break, evidence streaming out to the world, and every move under the public eye. For a moment, the only sound was the wind through the trees, the tense breathing of people who'd seen too much and survived anyway. Reynolds lowered his gun, lips drawn in a snarl. "This isn't over." "No," Frank replied, stepping forward, "but it's finally started." Avery stood straighter, clinging to her mother's arm. In that clearing, the rules of Oak Creek shifted. Old power, new voices, justice dangling by a thread. But the fight was far from finished. Ambulance lights flickered over the cracked black top outside Oak Creek Memorial. Avery lay on the gurney, her skin streaked with dirt and blood, pain flashing through every muscle as paramedics wheeled her through the glass doors. Vivian, still in torn scrubs, clutched her daughter's hand, refusing to let go. Every corridor echoed with the clatter of wheels, frantic voices, the sharp smell of antiseptic burning in the air. In a town like Oak Creek, secrets traveled faster than help. Avery was barely through triage when the first shadow fell over her bed. Mr. Sterling, Grant's father, arrived flanked by 2 lawyers and the hospital director. His tailored suit, silver cufflinks, and cold blue stare broadcast power in every inch. He didn't spare a glance for Avery. His words, low and venomous, were aimed at the director. "She's a danger to herself. We have reason to believe she attempted suicide at the cliffs. I want her transferred to psychiatric care. Today. No visitors, no exceptions." Vivian stepped in, jaw set. "She needs x-rays and stitches, not a padded room. I'm her mother. I decide her care." Sterling's smile was thin. "You're not a doctor. Dr. Stone, see that her chart is marked for observation. I don't want trouble in my hospital." The director hesitated, torn between the weight of Sterling's money and the fury in Vivian's eyes. I'll consult the board," he stammered. Outside, Frank was already at work. The call went out across counties. An unspoken signal carried on the rumble of Harley engines. Within an hour, the hospital parking lot became a fortress. Dozens of Hell's Angels lining the curb, boots planted, arms crossed. Their motorcycles formed a solid barricade, chrome and leather gleaming beneath streetlights. No one came or left without their notice. Patients gathered at windows, some in awe, others with fear. Nurses whispered in break rooms. "The Hell's Angels are here. For that girl. You know, the one who nearly died up at Eagle Ridge." Rumors blossomed, wild and unstoppable. Inside, Vivian slipped on a nurse's coat and ID badge. She moved between stations, taking Avery's vitals herself, slipping in and out of her daughter's room, daring anyone to stop her. "She's stable," she announced at every turn. "She's not suicidal. She's been attacked. If anyone so much as touches her chart, you answer to me." Mr. Sterling wasn't finished. He made calls, pressed palms, threatened funding. Security was doubled. At midnight, 2 orderlies tried to wheel Avery's bed down the hall for observation. They found Frank and Big Mike blocking the elevator, hands folded, smiles carved from granite. "She's not going anywhere," Frank said quietly. "Not tonight." Hospital staff, most of them born and raised in Oak Creek, grew bolder, passing information in low voices. "Don't let them take her," one whispered to Vivian. "Sterling owns this place, but we remember what he did to the mine families." Avery drifted in and out of sleep, pain medicine dulling the world. She woke to see the faces of the bikers through the window, silent, immovable, her mother's touch, Frank's voice promising, "We've got you, kid." The terror faded just a little. Sterling tried again at dawn. He stormed into the room with Dr. Stone and 2 security guards. "This is over," he said. "She's being transferred. Now." Vivian rose, blocking the bed. "Show me the court order," she demanded. Sterling's mask slipped for a moment. "You're playing a dangerous game, Nurse Johnson." Frank stepped forward from the corner, arms crossed, voice low and calm. "So are you, Mr. Sterling. And I promise, we never lose at this game." Stone cleared his throat, embarrassed. "Sir, the psychiatric team reviewed her. There's no evidence of suicidal intent. The trauma is consistent with assault. If you force this, we're liable." Sterling's fists clenched. He glanced through the blinds at the line of bikers and the crowd gathering outside, media, townsfolk, even a few off-duty miners. Oak Creek was watching. He tried one last tactic, voice oily. "If you let her make these wild accusations, it'll destroy this town. Think about what you're doing." Vivian's answer was unwavering. "I am thinking about my daughter." He stalked out, cell phone pressed to his ear, already plotting his next move. As the sun rose, the hospital stood in uneasy truce. In Avery's room, the walls were lined with silent sentinels, Vivian, Frank, Big Mike, and outside, The thrum of 100 motorcycles never let up. The town, for once, was not on Sterling's side. By midday, the siege was the talk of Oak Creek. Reporters arrived. A local preacher brought food for the bikers, whispering prayers through the fence. The nurses switched Avery's charts, hiding her real room from the administration. For the first time in her life, Avery was not alone. But victory was never easy in Oak Creek. While the hospital became a fortress, Sterling's men turned their eyes to a new target, the Johnsons' house, silent and unguarded. As the siege held, a different threat began to smolder. Night fell heavy over Oak Creek. At the hospital, the siege dragged on. Bikers still camped at the doors, their machines glinting under harsh security lights. Vivian never leaving Avery's side. Inside that narrow hospital room, exhaustion pressed down on everyone. But outside, another drama ignited. On the far side of town, the Johnsons' home sat quiet and defenseless, its windows dark, the porch light burned out. Few noticed when a battered pickup rolled down the empty street and idled at the curb. Two men in work jackets and baseball caps stepped out, faces shadowed. They circled the little house, checked for neighbors, then slipped around the back. Within minutes, the stench of gasoline curled through the weeds, sharp and unmistakable. A single match struck. The night hissed, and then fire erupted, hungry and merciless. It didn't take long for the blaze to swallow everything. Flames licked at the eaves, gnawed through the walls, billowed black smoke into the sky. Old photographs, school books, the last evidence of happier years, all vanished in the inferno. By the time sirens screamed down the street, it was far too late. The house collapsed, cinders tumbling into a glowing heap. The arsonists disappeared into the darkness, their work done. The townspeople stood on their porches, silent, afraid. Some crossed themselves. Most simply watched, knowing better than to get involved. Back at the hospital, Vivian stood at Avery's window, trying to catch a moment's peace. The air buzzed with tension, security pacing, Frank whispering with the bikers in the hall, nurses checking charts too often. It was Avery who saw the red glow on the horizon, a color that did not belong to ambulance lights or city lamps. "Mom," she said softly, "look, the sky." Vivian pressed her face to the glass. At first she thought it was her tired eyes playing tricks. Then, as smoke began to drift, she knew. Her knees gave way. Frank caught her before she fell. "It's our house," Vivian whispered, voice trembling. "Oh, God, why would they?" She tried to stand, but her legs refused to obey. Rage and grief twisted together, choking her. Frank squeezed her shoulder, voice hard as stone. "Sterling's not done. He wants every scrap of evidence gone. He thinks if he destroys your past, he can rewrite the future." Avery's hands clenched the hospital blanket. "I'm sorry, Mom. This is because of me, because I tried to fight back." Vivian shook her head fiercely, pulling Avery close. "No, this is because of them, because they're afraid of what we know, and we're not done fighting." Tears streamed down Vivian's face as she thought of all they had lost. Wedding photos, her husband's old work jacket, Avery's trophies, the box of letters she kept hidden under the bed. But even through the grief, her mind whirled. Why? Why risk so much after everything? Frank's phone buzzed. Another message from one of his lookouts. "Fire's out. Nothing left but ashes." Vivian turned to Avery, her voice hollow. "Your father would never have let this happen. He always said we had to be ready. For anything." Avery, still shaking, forced herself to remember. "Mom, the notebook Grant had, it isn't the only one. He bragged about it, but Dad must have kept a copy. He always made backups, didn't he?" Vivian's eyes widened. Memories rushed back. Her husband, up late at the kitchen table, scribbling in a battered black book. The secretive smiles. The times he said, "If anything ever happens, don't trust the obvious." But she'd buried all that under work and grief. "He told me." Vivian's voice broke. "He told me if there was ever trouble not to look at home, but at the place he loved most." She pressed a shaking hand to her mouth, struggling to recall. The oak tree, down by the water. He'd go fishing there every Sunday. Said that old tree could keep a secret longer than any person could. Avery's breath caught. Eagle Ridge, the giant oak. That's where he hid it. Frank stepped closer, realization dawning. He left the real evidence out there? Vivian nodded, her grief mixing with determination. A metal box, buried under the roots. I remember now. He never told me what was inside, just that it mattered. That if the worst ever happened, that box was our last hope. A moment of stunned silence settled over the room. Then Frank straightened, his eyes flashing. We need to move. If Sterling realizes what you remember, he'll send every thug he has to that ridge. We can't wait. Vivian turned to Frank, new strength in her voice. I know where the evidence is, but it's in their territory. We can't go alone. Frank gave her a fierce smile. Lucky for you, we never ride alone. Avery squeezed her mother's hand. We have to get that box. For Dad. For everyone he tried to protect. Vivian wiped her tears, resolve hardening in her face. Then let's go get it back, before they burn that to the ground too. As the first light of dawn crept through the hospital blinds, the plan was set. A last, desperate mission, deep into enemy land. The future of Oak Creek would be decided not in a courtroom, but in the shadows, beneath an ancient tree. The clock above the nurses' station flicked past midnight. Oak Creek Memorial, so recently a fortress, was now just another island of fluorescent light in the endless dark. Outside, the hospital siege quietly dissolved. Vivian pressed a last kiss to Avery's forehead, eyes shining with hope and terror, and whispered, "Be careful." Then Avery, bundled in a borrowed leather jacket, was whisked down a side corridor and out a back entrance, into the waiting arms of Frank and his crew. A sidecar, its paint scratched, its seat patched with duct tape, waited in the alley. Frank settled Avery in, securing her with bungee cords and a fierce, fatherly wink. Tonight, he promised, we get your father's truth. The rest of the Hells Angels' best Big Mike, Roxy, and 2 more weathered riders manned their bikes. In the gloom, their breath steamed in the cold. No headlights, no chatter, only the quiet rumble of engines coasting downhill. The tension so thick it muffled every sound except the drum of Avery's heart. They took the old service road, the back way to the quarry winding through woods, past shacks and hunting stands, down ruts known only to those who'd lived a hard life in Oak Creek. Clouds scudded over the moon, throwing everything into shadow. Every movement in the brush felt like a threat. Every turn promised an ambush. As the team neared the abandoned equipment yard, the woods erupted with the growl of engines and the piercing sweep of spotlights. 3 pickup trucks burst from cover, high beams slashing the dark, gun barrels poking through shattered windows. The quarry's private security hardened men in cheap uniforms, their pay bought and paid for by the Sterling family. Frank gunned the throttle. Hang on! The bikers surged forward. Tires spun. Gravel sprayed. The first truck swerved, trying to cut them off. But Roxy laid her bike low, skidding under the arc of the headlights, popping up again like a ghost. Big Mike roared straight at the barricade, scattering guards as if they were bowling pins. Shots cracked, wild and high. Frank twisted the bars, sidecar bouncing wildly. Avery clung to the frame, her stomach dropping as they weaved between trunks and brush. Keep your head down, Frank shouted over the wind and gunfire. A truck fishtailed behind them, a security guard leaning out the window, shotgun raised. Mike threw a length of chain, shattering the windshield. The guard tumbled out, howling. The chase spun into the ravine, headlights flickering between tree trunks, engines shrieking in the night. Branches whipped at Avery's face. Adrenaline blurred her vision, narrowed her world to the single, wild pulse of escape. Frank took a sharp right, dodging stumps and boulders. There's the clearing, he called. Get ready. They reached the giant oak, a monster older than the town itself, its roots knotted into the earth. Silvered in the moonlight, Frank braked hard, tires carving a muddy arc. "Go!" he ordered, leaping from the bike. He pressed a shovel into Avery's hands and unslung a pistol, eyes scanning the tree line. Avery's arms trembled as she slid from the sidecar onto the cold ground. For a moment she froze, fear gnawing at her resolve, but Frank's voice brought her back. "You've got this. Kid, your dad's counting on you." She crawled through the grass, hands numb, scraping dirt away from the roots. The ground was hard, packed with years of neglect. Trucks circled the clearing, beams dancing over her head. Bullets whipped through branches. Frank fired back, steady and deliberate, covering Avery, pinning the guards behind their vehicles. Big Mike and Roxy laid down their own hail of fire, engines revving as they looped the clearing, their bikes a blur of speed and defiance. The roar of the chase was deafening. Shouts, curses, and the sharp pop of gunfire echoed in the night. Avery clawed deeper. Her nails snapped, her breath fogged the dirt, and then her fingers struck metal. The old lunchbox, battered and cold, exactly where her father had promised. She yanked it free, her cry lost in the chaos. "I've got it!" she gasped. Frank glanced over, hope flaring in his eyes. "Back to the bikes! Move!" Avery tucked the box to her chest and crawled back. Frank fired one last volley, covering her retreat. Roxy swung the sidecar door open. In. Now. As Avery scrambled inside, a final wave of guards surged into the clearing. Frank, Mike, and Roxy formed a living shield, engines revving, ready to barrel through. But as they lurched away from the oak, Avery looked up and saw Harlan standing in the center of the exit road, shotgun slung over his shoulder, headlights catching his pale, haunted face. He didn't raise the weapon. He simply stared at Avery and Frank, jaw clenched, blocking their path. The night held its breath, the final escape impossibly close. Now one man's decision away. Frank cut the engine as the sidecar skidded to a stop. Gravel crunched under the tires. Moonlight slashed through the treetops. Avery's breath still thundered in her ears as she cradled the battered metal box against her chest. The forest behind them seethed with distant shouts and the angry rev of engines. But in this narrow track, everything shrank to the figure blocking their way. Harlan stood in the headlights, shotgun gripped in trembling hands, eyes swollen with exhaustion and guilt. His face, once smug and cocky, was ghostly in the glare. The barrel of the gun wavered, never quite steady. Behind him, the road twisted back to Oak Creek. Freedom so close it tasted bitter on the air. Frank raised his hands slowly, voice even but hard. "You gonna shoot us, Harlan? That the kind of man you want to be?" Avery's heart kicked at her ribs. She couldn't see Harlan's eyes behind the glare, but she heard the crack in his breathing, a small, fractured sound. Harlan tried to steady his grip. "Get out of the vehicle." "Frank, you too." "Avery." Frank obliged, moving with a careful calm that made the moment more dangerous, not less. He stepped between Harlan and the sidecar, broad frame shielding Avery. "You've got us, kid. But before you go playing sheriff, maybe you should ask yourself who you're protecting." Harlan's lips trembled. "You don't know anything about me. I know you watched Grant hurt Avery." Frank said quietly, "I know you stood by, let him ruin lives. But you didn't push her." "Not really. That wasn't you." "Was it?" Harlan's knuckles whitened on the gun. "It doesn't matter. My uncle says Frank cut him off. Your uncle's a coward. He's got Sterling's hand so far in his pocket he can't breathe. You really think he'll protect you if this goes sideways?" Avery climbed out of the sidecar, legs shaking. "Harlan, please, don't do this. I know you're scared. So am I. But it's not too late. You can end it." Harlan's breath rattled in his chest. The woods pulsed with the memory of violence. Grant's laughter, Avery's screams, the flames that took her home. He blinked, tears welling. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Grant said it would all be fine, that nobody would care. But now they're blaming me. My uncle told the police I was the one who planned it, said he could get me a deal if I played along. Frank's eyes narrowed. So they're hanging you out to dry. Harlan's whole body shook now, the gun falling to his side. I never meant for anyone to die, I swear. But Grant said, he said it was all just a game. Now my uncle wants me to take the fall. If I talk, he said, I'll never see the outside of a cell. Avery stepped closer, voice trembling but clear. What about my father? Harlan? What about every family who drank from the poisoned river because of that quarry? My mom, she's lost everything. So have I. If you want to be more than just another Sterling stooge, now's your chance. Harlan sobbed, shoulders shaking. I don't know what to do. Frank softened, voice low but fierce. You know what's right, son. The whole town's watching now. You can stand up, or you can hide behind that badge your uncle wears. A long silence. Harlan dropped to his knees in the dirt, shotgun landing harmlessly at his side. He covered his face with his hands, rocking with silent, desperate tears. Finally, he reached into his jacket, trembling, and pulled out a battered envelope sealed, thick with folded papers. He held it out to Avery, not looking at her. This is all of it. Dumping schedules, bribes, everything the quarry did to cover it up. Your dad, he was going to turn it over before they killed him. I found it in Grant's locker. I should have come forward sooner. Avery took the envelope with shaking hands. She felt the weight of it, years of lies, evidence of crimes, hope for something better. Harlan finally looked at her, eyes bloodshot but honest. I'm sorry, Avery, for everything. Frank stepped forward, placing a hand on Harlan's shoulder. It's not too late to make it right, but you have to move. Now. Suddenly, Harlan jerked his head up, panic blooming. Go. My uncle called in SWAT. He said he's gonna finish this. No matter who gets hurt, you have to run. Avery and Frank exchanged a look, fear, gratitude, and urgency burning between them. Avery squeezed Harlan's hand, her own voice hoarse. Thank you. This will change everything. Frank revved the sidecar's engine as Avery scrambled in. Envelope clutched tight in metal box at her feet. Harlan stayed on his knees, watching them disappear into the trees. The future uncertain, but, for once, his choice alone. As the sidecar tore down the winding road, Avery clung to the evidence, heart pounding. At last, they had everything they needed to bring the truth to light. Dawn barely brushed the horizon as Frank's sidecar growled down Main Street, tires spitting gravel, headlights dark. Avery clung to the battered metal box and envelope, heart pounding with fear and a flicker of something new, defiance. They passed shuttered storefronts and empty sidewalks. The radio station was just a low brick building between a diner and a hardware store. Its old call sign WOKC faded on the window. To most, it was background noise, forgotten in an age of cell phones and cable news. But Avery knew, if truth had any hope, it would start here, not in some police station under Sterling's thumb. Frank parked in the alley, helping Avery from the sidecar. Every movement urgent. Stay close. No matter what happens, we get your voice on the air. Big Mike and Roxy, battered but determined, flanked them as they slipped through the back door. Inside, a single overnight DJ, a nervous college kid, spun country records for a half-asleep county. He jolted upright as the bikers burst in, nearly knocking over his coffee. Frank spoke first, calm but commanding. We need your mic. Emergency broadcast. Lives are on the line. The DJ looked from Frank's battered knuckles to Avery's bruised face and seemed to understand. He stood, stammered, "Yes, sir," and let Frank lead Avery into the soundproof studio. Frank closed the blinds, locked the door. Mike and Roxy blocked the only exit. Outside, the first sunlight washed over Oak Creek, the streets still, but tension brewing beneath. Avery's hands shook as she opened the metal box and the envelope, spreading out the evidence, her father's logbook, hand-written pages, photos, and the USB stick with Grant's recorded confession. She stared at the microphone, ancient and scuffed, heart stuttering. Could her voice break through years of silence and fear? Frank put a hand on her shoulder. Gentle. You're ready. Make them listen. The DJ switched the station from automation to live, the signal humming. Frank pushed the mic toward Avery and nodded. She drew a ragged breath, pressed the red button, and spoke her voice. At first, was thin, almost a whisper. This is Avery Johnson. If you're hearing this, it's because I can't trust the police. My family, and this whole town, are in danger. But it's not too late, not if you hear what I have to say. She read from her father's journal. My name is Samuel Johnson. For 10 years, I worked the Sterling Quarry. I saw what they dumped in the river barrels of waste, poison leaking into our water. I tried to warn the county. I tried to warn you. But every time I spoke up, I was threatened. I kept this record because I knew someday someone would listen. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. Avery's hands trembled as she turned the page. My dad didn't die by accident. He died because he tried to protect us. He died because he was brave enough to stand up. She plugged in the USB, her next words quivering with fear and anger. Listen, this is Grant Sterling. This is what he said when he thought nobody could hear. Frank nodded at the DJ, who pushed a button. The studio filled with Grant's voice, arrogant, cruel. My dad made sure Johnson took his secrets to the grave. No logbook, no story, no problem. Silence filled the airwaves for a moment. Then Avery spoke again, voice stronger now, fury growing. They tried to destroy the evidence. They tried to kill me. Grant Sterling and his friends pushed me off a cliff yesterday. They thought I'd die, just like my father. But I'm still here. And I'm not the only one who's been hurt. Her words crackled across Oak Creek through radios, in dusty pickup trucks, through hospital waiting rooms, into kitchens and laundromats, and grocery aisles. Frank could see lights flickering on up and down Main Street as people listened, some frozen in shock, others trembling with rage. Avery read aloud the schedules Harlan had given her, the lists of dates, times, chemical names. They poisoned our water. They lied to our faces. And every time we cried out, the police and the hospital covered it up. Because they were paid to, because they were afraid. In a hushed voice, she spoke directly to the miners. You know what I'm saying is true. How many of you have lost family to cancer? How many saw the river turn black and never got answers? Frank watched the studio lights flicker as the station's phone lines began to blink, callers flooding in, some sobbing, some shouting, some barely able to speak. Avery pressed on, her voice now trembling with emotion but never faltering. Last night, they burned my house down to hide this. They would have killed me, too, if they could, but they can't kill the truth. Frank squeezed her shoulder, pride shining in his eyes. Avery finished, her last words ringing with pain and hope. If you ever loved this town, if you ever wanted to believe in justice, now is the time to act. Don't let them bury my father twice. Don't let them silence us again. She clicked off the mic. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then the world outside erupted. People poured from their homes, miners, mothers, kids in pajamas, old men on porches. Cars started, headlights shining into the gray dawn. Someone began to pound on the radio station's locked front door. Others called neighbors, friends, the press. In every corner of Oak Creek, anger blossomed, no longer just fear, but the fierce, united fury of a community betrayed. Frank opened the blinds. The parking lot swelled with a crowd, first dozens, then hundreds. The DJ, blinking, began patching calls through. Let her speak. I lost my brother at the quarry, he knew. And they killed him too. We want Sterling out. Avery sat in the studio, exhausted, clutching her father's journal and the evidence. Through the glass, she watched as people pressed closer, some shouting her name, others weeping. Frank hugged her, rough but gentle. You did it. The whole town's awake now. Avery took one last breath, turned to the microphone, and said, clear and unbreakable, "They killed my father. They tried to kill me, but they can't kill the truth." Her voice echoed on every radio, into every home, into every trembling heart. The voice from the radio had become a wildfire. By midday, Oak Creek no longer belonged to the Sterlings or to fear. News of Avery's broadcast swept from house to house, across muddy yards and factory floors. For the first time in years, silence shattered, and anger became action. The river of people flowed toward the center of town, picking up old union men and church ladies, nurses and teenagers, miners with rough hands, and mothers pushing strollers, all marching as one. By the time the first car horns blared in front of the courthouse, Main Street was impassable. Men in oil-stained overalls and women still wearing nightgowns joined the crush. Some carried homemade signs, "Justice for Samuel Johnson," "No more cover-ups," "Free the innocent, jail the guilty." Others simply shouted, voices rising into a chant that echoed between the brick buildings, "Sterling out! Sterling out! Sterling out!" In the crowd, the Hell's Angels stood in a line, battered and proud, some bruised but all unbowed. Avery, seated in her borrowed wheelchair, was flanked by Vivian and Frank. She looked impossibly small, yet every camera lens found her face. Townsfolk, strangers, and friends pressed forward for a glimpse, a touch, or a word of thanks. The miners clapped her on the back. Children reached out to grip her hand, solemn and awed. Across the street, the police station doors were locked and shuttered. Inside, confusion reigned. The phones rang off the hook. Deputies, some ashamed and some angry, peered through blinds at the surging crowd. In a cramped office, Chief Wilkins, gray-haired and upright, with deep lines of exhaustion, sat at his desk, badge heavy on his chest. He had served Oak Creek for 30 years. He had seen corruption grow like mold after a flood quiet, relentless and everywhere. For years, he had let the deputy chief, Rick Reynolds, run wild for the sake of peace, for the sake of his pension, for the illusion of order. But the old rules no longer applied. The world outside had changed overnight. He stepped to the window. The sea of faces below was like nothing he'd ever witnessed. "They're here for justice," he muttered, "and so am I." At the edge of the crowd, the courthouse doors opened and a handful of police escorted Sterling and Grant, faces pale, hands cuffed behind their backs, toward a waiting patrol car. The uproar was deafening. People surged forward, booing, pelting the Sterlings with angry words. Grant tried to hide his face. Mr. Sterling stared straight ahead, his jaw set, his eyes promising revenge. But the crowd wanted more. Someone shouted, "What about Reynolds? He covered it all up." Others echoed the cry, "No more dirty cops! Take the badge! Do it now!" Inside, Chief Wilkins called his staff together. His voice was firm, carrying a weight that cut through the noise. "I've made mistakes, but today, we set this right. Bring Deputy Reynolds to me." Now, two deputies hesitated, then nodded. Minutes later, Reynolds was dragged into the lobby, his uniform still crisp, his sneer still practiced. He glared at Wilkins, defiant. "What is this circus?" "Chief?" Wilkins stood before him, eyes clear, voice ringing. "Rick Reynolds, you are hereby suspended and relieved of your badge. You are under investigation for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and endangering the public." Reynolds laughed, trying to turn away. "You'll regret this." "Wilkins, I'm the only thing keeping this town together." But the chief would not back down. He reached out, unpinned the deputy's badge, and tossed it to the floor. "Not anymore." One of the younger deputies, tears in his eyes, stepped forward and snapped the cuffs on Reynolds' wrists. The lobby erupted in cheers. Outside, the crowd saw it all through the windows. Someone raised a megaphone and shouted the news. "Reynolds is out. The badge is gone." The surge was unstoppable. The courthouse lawn filled with music, weeping, shouts of triumph. Men shook hands. Women hugged. Some simply stood in disbelief, letting hope flood back for the first time in years. Avery wheeled to the front, holding her father's journal aloft. "We did this together," she cried. "No more hiding. No more lies." Frank and the bikers lifted their fists. Vivian, tears streaming, kissed Avery's cheek. The last act wasn't finished. Inside a locked cruiser, Mr. Sterling glared at the crowd. The weight of every crime pressed in on him. Grant slumped beside him, broken, but the town had spoken. No power, no money, no threat could drown their voices any longer. As dusk fell, lights flickered on all over Oak Creek, not in fear, but in celebration. The town square became a sea of lanterns and song. Yet amid the joy, Avery knew the real reckoning was still ahead. The biggest predator was not the badge or the bully, but the man who built his kingdom on poisoned land. Tomorrow, they would turn their eyes to the Sterling mansion, the last fortress, the last secret. Morning broke over Oak Creek like a warning shot. Sky washed in cold gold. The town was raw and awake, every street alive with rumors. The Sterlings were going down, the whole family brought to their knees. Yet out on the edge of town, at the hilltop mansion where the Sterlings had ruled for decades, panic was the only certainty. Inside, chaos. Mr. Sterling barked orders into 3 different phones. His jaw was set, hair disheveled, shirt untucked, a king suddenly stripped of his armor. Grant, wild-eyed and hollow, paced the marble foyer, voice hoarse from hours of blame and denial. "We have to go," Grant pleaded, clutching a duffel bag, face streaked with tears and sweat. "They're coming. Dad, the cops, the bikers, all of them. If we don't get out now," Sterling silenced him with a glare, switching from one call to the next. Private pilots, a senator's aide, a faceless lawyer promising miracles for the right price. "The helicopter is fueled. We fly to Chicago, then out of the country. Nobody will touch us there, not if they value their careers." But there was no conviction in his words, only fear gnawing through the cracks. Beyond the walls, the world closed in. At the private airstrip behind the mansion, the sound of roaring engines shattered the stillness. Bikers Frank, Big Mike, Roxy, and more lined up their motorcycles along the tarmac, engines rumbling, boots planted firm. The scent of oil, sweat, and righteous fury filled the morning air. Frank approached the waiting helicopter, helmet under his arm. The pilot hesitated, caught between money and fear. Frank stared through the cockpit glass at Sterling, then reached into his bag. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed Avery's mud-stained jacket salvaged from Eagle Ridge onto the windshield. The pilot recoiled as the stained fabric unfurled. A silent accusation. "You can't fly away from the truth." Sterling's voice rose in a panic. "Get them away from my bird. I'm paying you, go." But the bikers held their ground, unmoved. Frank's glare promised no negotiations. Back at the house, Grant was unraveling. "This is your fault," he screamed at his father. "You made me do everything. You said nobody would care. That money would fix it. Why did you make me hurt her?" Sterling's composure crumbled. "Don't you dare blame me. Grant, if you'd kept your mouth shut, none of this would have happened. I warned you about being careless." The mansion shook with the sound of helicopters, not theirs, but the thunderous chop of FBI rotors dropping from the sky. Black SUVs streamed down the private drive. Armed agents fanned out, weapons drawn, voices booming through megaphones. Robert Sterling. "Grant Sterling, FBI. Come out with your hands up. The property is surrounded. There is nowhere to run." Sterling's face went blank. His last call to a political ally cut dead. For the first time, real fear flickered in his eyes. He glanced at Grant, seeing not his son, but a liability, a mirror of all his failures. The doors burst open. Agents poured in. Sterling tried to raise his hands, but the moment for dignity had long since passed. He dropped to his knees, the quarry king surrendering on polished marble as Grant sobbed beside him. Frank watched from the tarmac as the two Sterlings were marched out, cuffed and silent. The air was thick with news cameras, townsfolk cheering, and a handful of old miners who spat at the fallen men's feet. Grant twisted as he was led to the waiting vehicle. "You said you'd protect me." "Dad, you said nothing would happen," Sterling barked back, voice raw. "You ruined everything. You and your friends, your stupidity destroyed us." The FBI agents loaded them into separate cars, slamming the doors, the thunder of the past finally catching up. In the swirl of commotion, Avery arrived, wheeled in by Vivian and flanked by the Hells Angels, her new chair gleaming a gift from the bikers. Logo emblazoned proudly. She watched as Grant was shoved into the police van. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, silence fell. Grant looked broken, desperate for forgiveness or comfort, something that would never come. Avery said nothing. She did not smile, did not gloat. Her gaze was steady, full of pity, even mercy. To Grant, that was the final judgment, a fate worse than anger. He turned away, face burning. Frank stepped up beside Avery, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's over, kid. You brought them down." Vivian wiped a tear, pride and sadness mingling in her eyes. "You're your father's daughter," she whispered. As the last of the sirens faded, the town exhaled. The reign of the Sterlings built on poison, cruelty, and secrets was finished. Yet as the dust settled and the crowd began to disperse, a quiet peace returned to Oak Creek. For the first time in decades, the future felt open, not just to Avery and her family, but to everyone who had suffered in the shadows. But the story was not done. After the storm, there remained scars to heal, trust to rebuild, and a town ready at last to claim its soul again. The first true warmth of spring drifted through Oak Creek, brushing away the last stains of winter and sorrow. On the broad lawn outside the old firehouse, tables groaned with food, piles of ribs, cornbread, potato salad, pies so fresh their steam mingled with the smoke from the barbecue pits. The air was alive with laughter and the clang of soda bottles, children darting underfoot, and neighbors swapping old stories with new hope. It was a day no one in town had dared to imagine just weeks before, a celebration, not just of justice, but of survival. The banner above the crowd read, "Oak Creek Healing BBQ Together for Our Future." Beneath it, Vivian and Avery moved between the clusters of people, collecting hugs, handshakes, and whispered thanks. The miners, many out of work now that the quarry was shuttered for investigation, stood with their families, pockets empty but eyes bright. For once, nobody was left alone. Avery wheeled herself through the crowd, her new wheelchair rolling smooth on the grass. The logo the Hells Angels had stitched onto the back, Valkyrie, the chooser of life, gleamed in the sun, a mark of resilience and belonging. She caught sight of Frank at the grill, apron tied around his tattooed waist, flipping burgers and barking orders. Vivian hovered close by, helping where she could, cheeks pink from smoke and happiness. There was no longer a trace of the hospital shift in her step, only the gentle warmth of a woman who had finally laid down the weight of fear. Throughout the afternoon, people shared memories. Some mourned what was lost: homes, health, loved ones poisoned by years of corporate greed, but most, emboldened by Avery's story and the broadcast that had changed everything, talked of the future. They spoke of new jobs and schools, of a river that might run clean again, of a town that belonged to its people, not its tyrants. The new town council, elected in a landslide after the uprising, announced the creation of a restitution fund. Checks would go to every family affected by the quarry's pollution, with the Johnsons near the top of the list. For many, it was the first time in years that justice had not felt like a fantasy. In the middle of the celebration, Harlan approached, He moved awkwardly through the throng, his frame thinner, more uncertain than before. The swagger was gone, replaced by humility and a kind of hopeful shame. He clutched a folded letter in one hand and paused beside Avery's wheelchair, searching her eyes for permission. "Avery," he began, his voice cracking, "there's no excuse for what I did, or what I didn't do. I was a coward. I let Grant, and my uncle, turn me into something I never wanted to be." Avery studied him in silence. Around them, conversation faded. Some watched with suspicion, others with curiosity. She spoke quietly but without bitterness. "You let fear control you, Harlan, but you made the right choice in the end. That matters." He looked down at his shoes. "It doesn't feel like enough. I'll spend my life making it right if you'll let me try." She nodded, the corners of her mouth lifting in a small, tired smile. "You'll have to. Redemption's not a quick fix. It's every day, for the rest of your life." Harlan's shoulders loosened, a weight lifting that only truth could grant. He pressed the letter into Avery's hand, a written confession, a promise, and a plan to testify at every hearing and for every family wronged. As he turned to leave, Frank called after him, "Next time, grab a spatula. Community service starts with the grill." The crowd laughed, tension breaking, and Harlan joined the line of volunteers, sweat beading on his brow as he served food and fielded, cautious, sometimes grateful, glances from the neighbors he'd betrayed. Later, as the sun dipped lower and golden light pooled under the picnic tables, Avery found herself beside Frank and Vivian. Frank leaned against the grill, arms folded, his tough exterior softened by the sight of Vivian laughing with a cluster of school kids. Avery cleared her throat, nerves fluttering. "Frank?" He looked over, blue eyes twinkling. "Yeah, kid?" She hesitated, then said, "Thank you for everything, for being there, for fighting, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Frank ducked his head, rubbing the back of his neck. "You did the heavy lifting, Valkyrie." Vivian slipped her hand into his, a blush rising. She met Avery's gaze, her smile trembling with joy. "He saved us both," she said softly. Avery looked between them, her heart swelling. She hadn't called Frank anything but the biker in months, always keeping him at arm's length, afraid to let anyone fill her father's shadow. But now, with her mother's eyes shining, with the weight of pain finally shared and lightened, she found the word, "Thank you, Uncle Gunner," she said, her voice steady. The words felt right, solid, like the click of a puzzle piece falling into place. Frank's eyes widened, then softened, and he pulled Avery into a careful hug, rough arms gentle around her shoulders. "That's a name I'd ride through hell to keep." The moment was interrupted by Roxy, who swaggered up with a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "For the Valkyrie." She grinned, handing it over. Avery tore back the paper. Inside was a custom leather jacket, the Hell's Angels crest on one sleeve, and on the back, in bold white script, "Valkyrie, the chooser of life." The crowd erupted in applause. Vivian wiped away tears, and Frank's laughter rumbled like distant thunder. Avery shrugged into the jacket, feeling the weight, the warmth, the promise of something more. For the first time in years, she felt whole. As dusk settled, lanterns flickered on, strings of lights looping through the trees. People danced, children shrieked, and the riverbank echoed with music and the sizzle of barbecue. Avery looked up at the stars, breathing in the scent of grass and smoke, and let herself believe in hope again. She caught Frank's eye. He nodded to the crowd, then to Vivian, ready to see what tomorrow looks like. "Kid?" Avery nodded, her voice strong. "I'm ready." The scars would always be there on the land, on the town, and inside each of them, but tonight, under the soft glow of healing and forgiveness, they were proof of survival, not defeat. And as laughter spilled into the night, Oak Creek took its first steps toward a future born from truth, courage, and the unbreakable will of those who had chosen to live. The cemetery lay on a low hill above the river, where wind carried the scent of wet earth and pine. Morning light slid across the headstones like a blessing. Avery wheeled along the gravel path in her black leather jacket, the one stitched with Valkyrie, the chooser of life, and stopped at a simple stone marked Samuel Johnson, husband, father. He told the truth when it cost the most. Vivian stood behind her, hands folded around a small bouquet of wildflowers. Frank Uncle Gunner now, in every way that mattered, waited a respectful distance away, arms crossed, eyes lowered. No engines, no noise, just the hush of wind through the grass and the soft tap of pebbles under Avery's wheels. She took a hardbound book from her lap, the published version of her father's journal. The cover was plain, "The River We Were Given." She ran a thumb along the spine, then placed it gently at the base of the stone. "We kept your promise." "Dad," she whispered, "they heard you." Vivian knelt to set the wildflowers alongside the book. Her voice trembled. He would have loved this town today, not because it's perfect, but because it finally listened. She brushed the stone with her fingertips, as if smoothing her husband's hair. He used to say, "Rivers remember. Maybe now they'll remember us kindly." Frank stepped forward, clearing his throat, trying to keep the emotion from cracking his voice. "I brought something." He set down a smooth river rock, hand-lettered in white paint. "Truth floats." He gave a small, embarrassed shrug. "Roxy made it. Said it belongs here." Avery smiled. "It does." They stood in silence for a long moment, three survivors bound by stubborn love and the refusal to look away. When a breeze lifted, Avery tilted her face into it, eyes closed. For the first time, she felt only the wind, not the drop beneath it. "Ready?" Vivian asked softly. Avery nodded. "I am." They left the hill with light steps and quiet hearts. That afternoon, the school doors opened on Avery's first day back. Students parted to let her pass. No eye-rolling, no smirks. Some nodded. A few lifted their chins with tentative smiles. A sophomore girl in a marching band jacket touched the Valkyrie patch and mouthed, "Thank you." A boy from shop class leaned on a locker and said, voice thick, "My dad, he's getting treatment now." "Because of you." Avery held his gaze and gave the smallest nod. No speeches, no ceremony, just acknowledgement, human and unstaged. At the far end of the hall, two familiar shadows flanked her, Big Mike and Roxy, walking like bouncers at a velvet rope nobody needed anymore. They weren't here to start trouble. They were here because she asked, and because they liked the look on students' faces when kindness wore leather. "Feels different," Roxy said, pushing open a double door with a fist. Mike grinned down at Avery. "Feels right." They rolled past the trophy case. New plaques had been added, community service awards, a memorial to miners lost, a photo of Samuel Johnson in a hard hat, smiling without apology. Someone had set a single white rose in front of it. In English class, Miss Tilden, who once pretended not to see, paused at the door and met Avery's eyes. "If you're willing," she said, voice steady, "there's something we'd like to start. A gathering, every Friday after school. We'll call it Wings of Steel. A place for anyone who's been pushed to the edge, to say what the river never carried away." She swallowed. "Would you lead it?" Avery considered the faces around her, the curious, the cautious, the bruised in ways no one could see. "Yes," she said, "I will." Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, the library overflowed freshmen with trembling hands, seniors hiding tears behind varsity sleeves, quiet kids who knew too well the geography of empty lunch tables. Avery led from her chair, not as a parade leader but as a witness. She told them the truth about fear, that it comes in waves, and sometimes it looks like silence. She told them about breath, that it could be the bravest sound on earth. She told them about rivers and roots, and how sometimes mercy arrives on two wheels, wearing patchwork leather. After that, invitations multiplied. Church basements, community centers, Gymnasiums. Avery spoke about bullying and courage, about the architecture of cruelty and the small, daily tools for dismantling it. One hand on the wheel, one word spoken aloud, one friend who stays. Frank and Vivian sat in the back for the first few talks, hands linked, tears kept private. Harlan showed up more than once, not to speak but to listen and to carry folding chairs for latecomers. He avoided the cameras. He didn't want applause. When a freshman boy whispered that he didn't know how to stand up to a teammate, Harlan stepped into the hallway and showed him how to say no without shaking. Spring unfurled into summer. The restitution fund paid hospital bills and rebuilt homes. The county installed new monitors along the river. Teachers received new training. The school introduced a bystander program with teeth. The Sterling's case moved through the courts. Justice came slowly, stubbornly, with receipts and testimony and the weight of a town that had learned how to look each other in the eye. And then, one quiet evening, a large envelope arrived at the Johnsons' apartment. The return address was stamped in blue ink with a crest Avery had once only seen on television. She opened it with careful fingers, breath catching as she read, "Congratulations. You have been admitted to Hawthorne University, a prestigious place her father used to joke about whenever her report cards came home with perfect lines. There was a scholarship, too, full tuition for a student who had shown extraordinary leadership in pursuit of public good." Her hands trembled. Vivian wrapped her from behind, cheek to cheek, laughter muffled by tears. Frank punched the air and whooped so loudly the neighbor's dog chimed in. They celebrated in the kitchen with lemon cake from the diner and paper cups of ginger ale. Avery kept the letter folded in her pocket for a week. Opening it whenever doubt tried to whisper, she imagined her father on the hill above the river, not as a ghost, but as a man who would have driven 3 hours just to sit in the last row of her first lecture, nodding every time she took a note. On the last day of summer, Avery returned to the cemetery alone. She set a Hawthorne sweatshirt on the grass navy, with white letters, and laid her palm flat against the stone. "I'll write new pages," she promised, "not to replace yours, to carry them forward." Back at school for the opening assembly, the gym stood packed. The principal spoke about building a culture of protection, about courage that begins in the smallest decisions. Then he stepped aside, and the students rose as Avery wheeled to center court. No fanfare, no spotlight, just the sound of 1,000 sneakers on polished wood and an attention so focused it felt like warmth. She lifted her eyes to the rafters, the banners, the lights, the slab of sky through the high windows and smiled. Above the gym's din, she heard engines roaring faintly from the parking lot. 2 silhouettes leaned against their bikes beyond the open doors. Arms folded, grins cocked. Roxy and Big Mike, guardians turned friends, sticking around not because they had to, but because the kid they respected asked them to stay. Avery took the microphone. "They thought pushing me off a cliff would be the end," she said, her voice steady as steel. "They didn't know it would be the way they taught me to fly." The gym erupted cheers, applause, some students in tears, others laughing in pure relief. In Oak Creek, Avery's courage showed that even the most broken wings can take flight, and that justice is possible when a community stands together. Which moment in her journey inspired you the most, or made you think differently about courage? If you found hope in Avery's story, please like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales that can change lives.